The world, as Kale understood it, was a finite and unforgiving canvas painted in a palette of primal certainties. There was the ochre red of blood and clay, the charcoal black of night and ancient cave paintings, the bone white of winter frost and the skeletons of long-dead beasts, and the endless, overwhelming green of the great forest that bordered their existence. His people, who called themselves the Sunstone Clan in reverence for the flint that gave them both fire and sharp edges, lived their lives tethered to these certainties. Their existence was a brutal but simple rhythm. The rising of the Sun Father, a glorious, life-giving wound in the sky. The stalking of the great-haired mammoths across the vast, wind-swept plains. The gathering of roots and berries in the forest's fringe. And the huddling together against the cold breath of the Moon Mother in the deep, smoky belly of their ancestral caves. Their home was a limestone sanctuary, a network of caverns carved by ancient water into the face of a great escarpment they called the Stone Brow. From the mouth of the main cave they could watch the world unfold. They watched the seasons bleed into one another, turning the plains from the pale brown of the dry months to the fleeting green of the wet. They watched the herds of aurochs, giant deer, and woolly rhinos flow like a slow-moving river across the land. Survival was the clan's only scripture, and its tenets were carved into every member from birth. Be strong, be swift, be silent in the hunt, and never, ever stray from the known paths. In this world of rigid function, Kale was an anomaly, a flaw in the weave. While other boys his age were consumed with perfecting the heft and balance of a spear, Kale was captivated by the spiral of a snail's shell. While they learned to read the subtle shift of a mammoth's gait, Kale would lose himself in the shifting architecture of the clouds, seeing the forms of great beasts and spirits in their silent, majestic drift. He was a collector of useless things. A river stone smoothed into a perfect oval, a fallen eagle's feather with its impossible, intricate barring, a piece of amber that held a trapped insect, a tiny life frozen for all of time. These objects held a kind of magic for him, a silent language that spoke of patterns and time, concepts that had little value when a saber-tooth was on the prowl. His nature made him a subject of constant, low-grade scorn, most pointedly from Rorik. Rorik was the living embodiment of the Sunstone Clan's ideal, a man seemingly carved from the same granite as the mountains themselves. His shoulders were a yoke of muscle, his hands thick and calloused, his gaze direct and utterly devoid of abstraction. Rorik saw the world as a series of problems to be solved with force. A mammoth was a mountain of meat to be brought down. A river was an obstacle to be crossed. A weak clan member was a liability to be chided or cast out. In his brutally simple calculus, Kale was a dangerous indulgence, a sky dreamer, whose head was filled with the unproductive mist of the morning valleys. He follows the flight of a butterfly while the scent of the herd grows cold. Rorik would often grunt, his voice a gravelly rumble as he worked a piece of flint, flakes of it falling like sharp, black snow. His spear arm is strong enough, but his spirit is weak. He looks for signs in the leaves when the only sign that matters is a fresh track in the mud. The spirits of the hunt do not reward such foolishness. The clan's territory was circumscribed by ancient fears and geographical realities. To the east lay the endless plains. To the south, the great river, their primary source of water, meandered into a vast, malarial marshland, a place of crocodiles and buzzing death. To the west, the jagged, impassable peaks of the spine of the world clawed at the sky. And to the north there was the great forest. The clan treated the forest like a dangerous animal. They would venture into its fringes for firewood, medicinal herbs and small game, but they never went deep. The deeper forest belonged to spirits, to shadows, to things best left undisturbed. Alara, the clan's lorekeeper, was the source of these warnings. Her face was a landscape of deep wrinkles, each line a story, and her eyes, clouded by cataracts, seemed to see not the world in front of her, but the world of memory and myth. In the evenings, as the fire spit and danced, casting monstrous shadows on the cave walls, she would speak of the forest's heart in a voice as dry and fragile as an autumn leaf. She spoke of a time, long before the Sunstone clan had settled at the Stone Brow, when a hunting party, driven by a great famine, had journeyed deep into the northern woods, seeking a legend. They sought a place of impossible bounty, a place where the sky river falls to the earth. They never returned. Only one, a young girl, half mad with terror and awe, stumbled back months later, speaking in riddles of a great, roaring mouth and two voices that speak as one. Her story became a cautionary tale, a wall of fear that had contained the clan for generations. It was this forbidden direction, the north, from which the change in Cale's life began. It was not a sight, but a sound. At first, it was so subtle he dismissed it as a trick of his own ears, the whisper of blood pulsing past his eardrum. It was a low, subliminal vibration, a hum that felt less like it was traveling through the air and more like it was rising from the very bedrock of the earth. He would feel it most keenly when he lay his head on the stone floor of the cave at night, a deep, resonant thrumming that was utterly alien to the known sounds of his world, the howl of a wolf, the crack of thunder, the groan of shifting rock. His curiosity became a quiet obsession. On solo foraging missions, he began to push the boundaries, venturing farther north than anyone else dared. He moved with a preternatural stealth, a skill honed by years of observing rather than acting. He learned to place his feet as silently as a lynx, to use the wind to carry his scent away, to become just another shadow in a world of shadows. In these deeper woods, the world began to change. The trees were older, larger, their bark thick with a fur of green moss. The birdsong was different, more complex and melodious. One day, following a trail of unusually vibrant blue mushrooms, he came upon a small, fast-flowing stream. The water was unlike the muddy, slow-moving water of the great river. It was crystal clear and bitingly cold. It sang as it tumbled over a bed of stones that were smooth to the touch and colored in shades. He had never seen some a deep, emerald green, others a milky quartz, and a few streaked with veins of a glittering golden mineral. He knelt, plunging his hands into the shockingly cold water, and felt the hum more strongly than ever, a distinct vibration traveling through the water and into his bones. He was convinced. The sound was real. It had a source, and this stream was its messenger. He tried to share his discovery, his voice full of a quiet, earnest excitement as the clan gathered around the fire that evening. "There is a song in the earth," he began, holding up one of the glittering stones. "To the north. It comes on a river of cold, clear water." Rorik, tearing at a piece of half-cooked meat with his teeth, let out a short, derisive laugh that echoed in the cavern. "The earth grinds its teeth and groans, boy. It does not sing. You heard the wind in the mountain passes. Your head is so full of sky dreams you can no longer tell the difference between what is real and what is fancy." A ripple of sycophantic laughter followed from the other hunters. Cale's gaze found Alara. The old woman was staring into the flames, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she was silent, letting the embers of Rorik's mockery die down. Then, she spoke, her voice a low incantation. "The girl who returned," she said. The roaring mouth sang a song of creation and destruction. She said it was the heartbeat of the world made audible. She turned her milky eyes towards Cale. "Some ears are tuned to hear such things. But be warned, Cale. The path to a new song often leads over a cliff's edge." Her words, intended as a warning, were instead a confirmation. They fanned the spark of his curiosity into a flame. The song of creation and destruction. Two voices that speak as one. It resonated with the complex, layered nature of the hum he had heard. His clandestine journeys grew bolder. He began to neglect his duties, his share of the hunt, his role in gathering firewood. Instead, he would slip away at dawn and return at dusk. His pouch filled not with food but with more strange stones, oddly shaped pieces of wood, and the memory of that ever-loudening sound. The air in the deep north carried a new scent, a clean, damp perfume of wet stone and ozone, like the aftermath of a great lightning strike. The hum was no longer a subtle vibration. It was a constant, low roar on the very edge of hearing, a palpable presence that filled the landscape. The inevitable confrontation with Rorik came on a day of hot winds and frayed tempers. The hunters had returned empty-handed, the mammoth herds having moved on sooner than expected. Scarcity sharpened fear, and fear soured into anger. Rorik cornered Kale as he tried to slip back into the caves, grabbing his arm in a grip of iron. "Where is your kill?" Rorik demanded, his voice dangerously low. He shook Kale's foraging pouch, and a cascade of smooth, green stones tumbled onto the dusty ground. "We hunt for meat to feed our children, and you return with rocks. Do you mock our hunger, Sky Dreamer? Do you think your stones will fill our bellies?" "They are from the place of the sound," Kale stammered, intimidated but unwilling to surrender his conviction. "The place from the old stories. I believe it is a place of great power." "It is a place of death," Rorik roared, his face darkening with fury. He shoved Kale hard against the cave wall. "The story of the lost hunters is a warning, not an invitation. Your selfish obsession will bring a curse upon us. You will anger the spirits of the deep wood. From this day on, you will not leave the camp. You will mend nets and sharpen spears. You will do the work of the clan, or you will be cast out to find your singing stones in the belly of a saber-tooth." The threat was the gravest Rorik could make. To be an outcast was to be handed a sentence of death. Kale felt the eyes of the clan on him, saw the fear and agreement in their faces. He was alone, his quest deemed a madness. That night, unable to sleep, Kale sat by the dying embers of the communal fire, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. The cave was filled with the soft sounds of sleep, but for Kale, it was the sound of a closing trap. He could stay, abandon his quest, and live a life of quiet shame under Rorik's thumb, his spirit slowly starving to death. Or he could leave, embrace the terror of the unknown, and follow the song, wherever it led. A soft rustle of furs announced Alara's approach. She sat beside him, the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs clinging to her ancient frame. She said nothing for a long time, and then slowly, with arthritic deliberateness, she reached into a small pouch she wore around her neck. She withdrew a single object and pressed it into his hand. It was a crystal, perfectly clear, shaped like a teardrop. It caught the faint, pulsing glow of the embers and fractured it into a dazzling spray of miniature rainbows. It was breathtakingly beautiful. "My grandmother's grandmother was the girl who returned," Alara whispered, her voice so low it was almost lost in the crackle of the coals. "She was the only one. She came back with this in her hand and madness in her eyes. She called it a tear of the mountain, a piece of the rainbow captured in stone. She said the spirits of the falls wept with a beautiful power. The clan elders of that time were terrified. They declared her story a taboo, the place forbidden. They feared the power she spoke of, feared it would unmake their world." She closed Kale's fingers around the crystal. Its sharp facets dug into his palm, a point of brilliant, grounding clarity. "Rorik is a good man, Kale," she continued softly. "He is the stone wall that protects the clan from the wind. He sees only the threats of today, and that is his strength. But you feel the tremor of the tomorrow that is coming. That is a different kind of strength, and it is a lonely one. The clan needs its wall, but it also needs its dreamer. If the song is as loud in your heart as you say, then you have no choice. You must go." Her words were not just permission, they were a prophecy. He felt the last of his fear burn away, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. Before the first pale light of dawn had breached the horizon, Kale slipped out of the sleeping caves. He carried his best spear, a flint knife, his fire-starting kit, and a waterskin. He took no food, a deliberate act of faith in the promise of the unknown land ahead. At the mouth of the cave, he left a small, deliberate pile of the green and gold-veined stones he had collected a silent message, a question for his people to find when they awoke. As he stepped under the dark eaves of the great forest, the familiar world of the Sunstone clan dissolved behind him. He was a ghost, leaving a life that no longer fit. Ahead, the forest was a wall of blackness, a place of myth and terror. But for the first time he could hear the sound clearly without straining. It was a deep, resonant, powerful roar, the sound of the world's own heart, and it was calling him home. Chapter 2. The Path of Water and Whispers. The moment Kale passed beyond the familiar, sun-dappled fringe of the forest, the world changed so completely it felt as though he had stepped through an invisible veil. The air, once warm and filled with the familiar sense of pine and dry earth, became cool, damp, and heavy, thick with the primal perfume of decay and germination. It was a smell of deep, wet soil, of millennia of fallen leaves composting into black humus, of fungal rot and the sweet, narcotic fragrance of night-blooming orchids he could not see. The light died. The canopy of colossal, ancient trees, ironwoods, moss-draped oaks, and towering pines whose crowns were lost in the gloom locked together like the vaulted ceiling of a vast, green cathedral, permitting only the dimmest, most spectral twilight to reach the forest floor. His senses, always acute, were forced into a state of hypervigilance. Every sound was magnified in the oppressive silence. The snap of a twig under his own foot sounded like a cracking bone. The frantic buzz of a trapped insect, the slither of a snake through the leaf litter, the mournful hoot of a hidden owl. Each noise was a potential story of danger or opportunity. He felt the constant, unnerving sensation of being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes, the collective gaze of a wilderness that had never known the tread of man. He was an intruder here, a warm-blooded, soft-skinned anomaly in a world of fang, claw, and ancient indifference. The first days were a brutal education in solitude and fear. The nights were the worst. He would find shelter in the hollow of a lightning-scarred tree or beneath a shallow rock overhang, and build a tiny, almost smokeless fire. The small circle of flickering orange light was his only shield against a vast, living darkness that pressed in from all sides. The nocturnal world came alive with a cacophony of terrifying sounds. The cough-like grunt of a stalking predator, the screech of some unknown avian, and once, a deep, guttural roar from the distance that made his blood run cold and his hand grip his spear so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sleep was a shallow, fitful thing, a series of brief descents into anxious dreams, from which he would jerk awake at the slightest sound, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Yet, his unique skills, once derided, were now the keys to his survival. Rorik would have been lost here, his plains-honed tracking skills useless in this vertical world of tree and shadow. But Kale's lifetime of quiet observation had taught him a different language. He found water by following the iridescent flash of a kingfisher to a hidden spring. He found food by noticing the subtle signs the animals left, partially nibbled mushrooms of a specific, safe variety, or the scratched bark on a tree whose roots were starchy and edible. He learned to read the forest's intricate grammar. A sudden silence among the chattering monkeys in the canopy meant a ground predator, like a leopard, was near. A specific pattern of broken ferns indicated the passage of a wild boar. He moved not like a hunter, but like a ghost, weaving himself into the fabric of the forest. His goal not to conquer it, but to pass through it unnoticed. His guide remained the sound. The deep, resonant hum was a constant companion, a physical presence that grew in strength with each northward step. It was no longer just a sound he heard, but a vibration he felt in the marrow of his bones. It seemed to infuse the very rocks and trees with its energy, and it gave him a direction, a purpose that overrode his fear. He was a moth drawn to a magnificent, thundering flame. The landscape began to tilt upwards. The forest floor grew more treacherous, a chaotic jumble of moss-slick boulders and tangled roots that seemed designed to trip him, to break an ankle and leave him helpless. The stream he had found, his silver thread through the labyrinth, grew from a gentle brook into a boisterous, white-water torrent. It crashed and boiled its way downwards, its chattering voice a high, frantic counterpoint to the deep, bass drone that now filled the entire world. On the 5th day of his journey, he had a profound and terrifying encounter. He was carefully making his way along a narrow ledge when he saw it, not 20 paces away. A great cave bear, larger than any beast he had ever seen depicted on the walls of his home, was standing on its hind legs, scratching its back against the rough bark of an enormous pine. It was a monster of myth, a mountain of shaggy fur and muscle, with a head the size of a boulder and claws as long as his forearm. It had not yet seen him. Cale froze, his body turning to ice. To run was to invite a chase he could not win. To fight was an absurdity. His spear felt like a child's toy. In that moment of pure, primal terror, an instinct born of his unique nature took over. He did not see a threat to be vanquished. He saw a magnificent, ancient power, the true king of this domain. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his spear, pointing the tip to the ground in a gesture of submission. He met the beast's gaze as it finally turned its massive head. The bear's eyes were small, black, and shockingly intelligent. There was no malice in them, only a deep, profound, and ancient curiosity. It took a long, snuffling breath, tasting his scent on the air. For a lifetime that lasted perhaps 10 heartbeats, man and beast simply regarded each other across the gulf of species. Then, with a low grunt of dismissal, the bear dropped to all fours and ambled away into the undergrowth, disappearing with a silence that was astonishing for a creature of its size. Cale leaned against the rock wall, his legs trembling uncontrollably. He had been weighed and found wanting, but also found harmless. He had not offered a challenge, and so his life had been spared. The encounter changed him. It stripped away the last of his clan-born arrogance. He was not a hunter here. He was a pilgrim, and his survival depended on reverence. By the 7th day, the roar was no longer a sound. It was a physical force. It shook the ground beneath his feet and vibrated in his chest cavity. A relentless, deafening percussion that made his teeth ache. The air was thick with a fine, perpetual mist that soaked his leather tunic and beaded on his skin. The trees dripped constantly, and every surface was covered in a thick, emerald-green velvet of moss. The world had become a symphony of water, stone, and thunder. He was climbing a steep, final ridge, his muscles burning, his lungs gasping in the humid air. He had to pull himself up by roots and rock ledges, the roar so overwhelming he could no longer think. It was pure sensation, a total immersion in elemental power. He clawed his way over the top of the ridge, collapsing onto a wide, flat promontory of rock, his body screaming with exhaustion. He pushed himself to his knees, wiped the clinging mist from his eyes, and looked up, and the world he knew ended. His mind, conditioned by the gentle slopes of the plains and the human scale of the forest, could not immediately comprehend the spectacle before him. It was a scene of such impossible grandeur that it broke all frames of reference. He was standing on the precipice of a vast, circular canyon, a colossal amphitheater carved by the gods. And from the cliff face opposite, plunging into the misty abyss below, were 2 waterfalls. The twin voices, the sky river falling to the earth. They were perfect, terrible, and divine. The waterfall to the left was a singular, concentrated pillar of raw power. It was a solid, roaring column of white fury that fell in an unbroken plunge for a distance his mind could not measure. It struck the unseen canyon floor with a continuous, cataclysmic explosion, a sound of thunder that was the source of the roar he had followed. It was pure, masculine energy, a spear of water hurled by a giant. It was Rorik's ideal made manifest, unbending, overwhelming force. The waterfall to the right was its perfect counterpoint. It was wider, more ethereal, a shimmering curtain of liquid light. It did not fall in a single brutal column but descended in a series of graceful, terraced cascades, splitting and weaving into 1,000 braids of silver and crystal. Its sound was a higher, more musical accompaniment to the thunder of its partner, a great, sibilant hiss, the sound of 1,000,000 whispers speaking in unison. It was the embodiment of feminine grace, of intricate, yielding strength. It was Alara's wisdom in liquid form. Together, they were a breathtaking duality. Power and grace, fury and song. A god and a goddess, forever falling, forever full. Their voices joined in a chorus that had been singing since the dawn of time. Cale was paralyzed, his jaw slack, his spirit utterly overwhelmed. As he watched, the sun broke through the overcast sky, and its rays pierced the thick mist rising from the canyon floor. A rainbow ignited in the air, a perfect, incandescent arc of colors so vibrant and pure they made his heart ache. It was a bridge of light, a divine covenant that seemed to link the two falls. Cale fell to his knees, his spear clattering unheeded on the stone. He felt tears streaming down his face, though whether they were his own or the mist of the falls, he could not tell. All his life he had felt like an outsider, a dreamer whose visions had no place in the world. But here, in this place, was a reality that dwarfed his wildest dreams. It was as if the world itself was showing him a secret, validating his entire existence. This was the pattern he had been searching for, the song he had been born to hear. He did not know how long he knelt there, a tiny, insignificant creature before this altar of creation. It was only when the setting sun began to paint the clouds in fiery oranges and purples that the practical need for shelter broke through his trance. He scouted the edge of the canyon and found a narrow, treacherous track, little more than a goat path, leading down into the Great Basin. The descent was like entering another world. The air grew warmer, the mist thicker, and the vegetation became a riotously lush, tropical paradise. Giant ferns, taller than a man, grew in abundance. Flowers with petals the size of his hand bloomed in impossible shades of crimson and violet. The roar of the falls was all-encompassing, a physical buffeting that made the very air seem to tremble. At the bottom of the canyon, near the vast, churning, turquoise pool where the two falls met their end, he found his sanctuary. Tucked behind the shimmering veil of the wider, cascading waterfall was a dark opening in the rock face. A cave. With his heart pounding with a mix of trepidation and hope, he pushed through a thick curtain of dripping ferns and stepped through the sheet of falling water. The transition was instantaneous and profound. The deafening, chaotic roar of the outside world was instantly muffled, transformed into a deep, resonant, and strangely peaceful rumble. He stood dripping in a wide, dry cavern. The air was cool and still, and the light was magical. The late afternoon sun, filtered through the moving screen of water, filled the cave with a shimmering, ever-shifting, aquamarine glow. It was like being in the heart of a giant water-blue gemstone. From the mouth of his new home, he had a perfect, framed view of the thundering fury of the other fall. He was safe, hidden, looking out from a place of peace at a spectacle of awesome power. He had done it. He had followed the echo in the stone, walked the path of water and whispers, and found the singing, roaring, sacred heart of the world. And it was more magnificent than his dreaming soul could have ever imagined. Chapter 3: The Naming of Spirits. For a cycle of days that lost all meaning, Cale lived in a state of suspended reality, a dweller in the sacred space between water and stone. The canyon was his universe, the cave his womb. Time was no longer marked by the harsh demands of the hunt or the anxious rationing of food, but by the subtle shifting of the aquamarine light within his sanctuary and the eternal, thunderous rhythm of the falls. This rhythm seeped into him, recalibrating his very heartbeat to its primal, powerful cadence. The constant, low rumble that had once been an external sound was now the ground note of his own being. He spent his days in a state of reverent exploration, learning the secrets of his new world. The great, churning pool at the base of the falls was a treasury of life. Enormous, silver-flanked fish, sleek and muscular, thrived in the oxygen-rich water. He fashioned a simple, multi-pronged spear from a straight, hardened sapling and found he could easily catch them in the calmer eddies near the shore. He would clean them on the smooth, water-worn rocks and smoke them over a small, carefully tended fire built from driftwood. The meat was rich, oily, and incredibly nourishing. For the first time in his life, the gnawing anxiety of hunger was completely absent. Here, sustenance was not a prize won through brutal struggle, but a freely given gift. The flora of the canyon floor was a garden of wonders. He discovered tubers that, when roasted in the coals, were creamy and sweet, and clusters of deep purple berries that tasted of sunshine and rain. One day, exploring a damp, shaded cleft in the canyon wall, He found a patch of broad-leafed plants with a familiar, pungent, and soothing aroma. It was the healing herb Alara used so sparingly, the one she would trade precious flint tools for with other clans. She would chew a single leaf into a poultice to draw infection from a wound, or boil it into a tea to break a fever. In the clan's lands, finding a single plant was a cause for celebration. Here it grew in a thick, verdant carpet. This place offered not just life, but the preservation of it. His innate creativity, so long suppressed, began to flourish. On the banks of the great pool, he found a deposit of exceptionally fine, gray clay. Felt cool and silken in his hands. He spent an entire afternoon simply working it, feeling its plastic nature, remembering the crude, functional pots his clan used. He began to shape a bowl, not a rough, lumpy thing, but one with smooth, curving sides, its shape inspired by the ovate stones he loved to collect. He incised a simple, wave-like pattern around the rim with a sharp twig, an echo of the cascading waterfall. He left it to dry in a sunny spot, a small gray prayer to the spirit of this place, an act of creation in a landscape of overwhelming creative force. But his deepest meditations were reserved for the falls themselves. He would spend hours sitting at the mouth of his cave, simply watching them, learning their moods. In the full light of midday, they were a spectacle of raw, brilliant power. In the twilight, they became shadowy, mysterious figures, their roar a deep, mournful song. In the moonlight, they were transformed into columns of flowing silver, impossibly beautiful and ethereal. He began to understand that they were not just water falling over a cliff. They were living entities, twin spirits with distinct and complementary personalities. Following Alara's parting wisdom to know a spirit's name is to understand its power sought to name them. The act of naming felt momentous, a sacred responsibility. The thundering, violent cataract, the embodiment of untamed strength, he named Anchor, the old word for fury or great power. It was the hunter, the protector, the unyielding force that had carved the canyon and whose roar warned all away. He saw in it the spirit of Rorik, not the scornful man, but the ideal of strength that Rorik represented, the spear that kept the clan safe. The wider, graceful falls that veiled his cave, the source of his sanctuary, he named Lyra, an ancient sound that meant whisper or song. It was the nurturer, the healer, the source of the life-giving mist and the gentle, constant music that soothed his soul. It was the spirit of Alara, the keeper of wisdom, the gentle hand that mended and guided. Anchor and Lyra, fury and song, the spear and the cauldron. One could not exist without the other. Their power was in their union, their eternal dance of opposition and harmony. And the rainbow that appeared each day in their shared mist was their child, a fleeting, beautiful promise born of their combined might and grace. This revelation struck Kale with the force of a physical blow. He finally understood the deep wrongness of his clan's way of life. They revered only the spirit of Ankorth Hunt, the struggle, the spear. They had forgotten the spirit of Lyra nurturing, healing, creating. They were unbalanced, a people living only half a life, clinging to a harsh, gray existence on the plains while this paradise, this place of perfect balance, waited for them. The discovery was not his alone to keep. It was a message, a destiny for his entire people. The thought of returning, which had once seemed impossible, now became an urgent, burning necessity. He had to show them. He had to bridge the worlds of his vision and their reality. He spent 2 more days preparing, gathering evidence that their pragmatic minds could not deny. He smoked a large quantity of the giant fish, wrapping them carefully in layers of the broad, waxy healing leaves. He dug up a pouchful of the sweet tubers. He filled his water skin with the clear, cold water from a spring near the base of the falls. As a final piece of evidence, a symbol of a new way of thinking, he took his small, sun-baked clay bowl. The journey back was through a different forest. The path was the same, but Kale was transformed. He was no longer a fearful refugee, but a confident messenger, a prophet returning from the mountain. The forest no longer felt alien or menacing. He moved through it with a newfound sense of belonging, reading its signs with an easy familiarity. He felt the spirit of Anchor in the strength of his legs and the spirit of Lyra in the keenness of his senses. He carried the song of the falls within him, and it made him fearless. He emerged from the forest onto the familiar plains at sunset on the 5th day. The land looked barren and exhausted, the air thin and dusty. In the distance, the smoke from the clan's fire was a weak, struggling plume against the immense, indifferent sky. A profound pity and a fierce love for his people swelled in his chest. His arrival was met with stunned silence, followed by a surge of raw, untempered fury. Rorik, his face a mask of grim frustration from another failed hunt, strode forward, his hunters flanking him like a pack of wolves. "The ghost returns," Rorik spat, his voice cracking with rage. "He abandons his clan to starvation and comes back with the stink of the deep woods on him. Have you come to watch us die, Skydreamer?" Kale did not answer with words. He held Rorik's fiery gaze, his own calm and unyielding. With slow, deliberate movements he unslung his pack. He laid the large, leaf-wrapped bundles of smoked fish on the ground. The scent of rich, smoked meat wafted on the evening air. The hunters stared, their anger faltering, replaced by a raw, naked hunger. They had never seen such fish. He then presented the tubers and the waterskin. "I have not come from a place of death," Kale said, his voice quiet but carrying an extraordinary weight of authority. "I have come from a place of life, a place where the water is pure and the food is abundant. A place the old stories called the Falls of the Sky River." That night, the entire clan gathered. The mood was tense, a mixture of disbelief, hope, and deep-seated fear. Kale stood in the center, the firelight casting his shadow long and powerful against the cave wall. He did not just speak, he wove a spell. He used the rhythm and cadence of Alara's storytelling, painting a vivid picture of the canyon. He described the thunder of Anchor and the song of Lyra. He spoke of the sacred rainbow, the healing garden, the endless bounty of the water. He made them feel the mist on their faces and hear the roar in their bones. When he finished, a deep silence held the cave. Then, Kale walked to Alara and placed his final, most potent piece of evidence in her hands. The small, perfectly formed clay bowl. The old woman's fingers, gnarled as ancient roots, traced its smooth surface, its incised, wave-like pattern. She held it to her cheek, then tapped it with a fingernail, listening to the clear, resonant sound it made. A look of profound, soul-shaking awe dawned on her face. "The Earth-Shaper's clay," she breathed, her voice trembling with emotion. She held it up for all to see. "The first mother's gift." The stories say that only in a sacred place, a place of perfect balance where water and stone are joined in power, can such clay be found. It is not just a story. Her cloudy eyes found Kale, and they were filled with a brilliant light. "He has found it." The boy did not follow a dream. He followed a memory of our people, a memory we had forgotten. Her words were a thunderclap. The spiritual authority of the clan had spoken. The physical proof lay before them. The hunters who had scoffed now looked at Kale with a new, hesitant respect. The women and children looked at him with desperate hope. Rorik stood alone, his world turned upside down. His entire life had been built on a foundation of hard-won, practical truths, and Kale had shattered it with a fish and a story. He looked at the hungry faces of his people, then at the undeniable evidence at his feet. His pragmatism, for the first time, was a prison, not a shield. "A full belly for one night is not a new life," he growled, the last stand of a dying worldview. "The forest is full of dangers. The path you speak of could be a path to our doom. Or it could be the path to our survival," Kale replied, his voice ringing with a conviction that could not be denied. "I do not ask you to believe my words. I ask you to believe your own eyes. I will lead any who wish to see. The place is real. Anchor and Lyra are waiting." A long, tense moment stretched. Then, a young hunter, one Rorik had trained himself, stepped forward. "My child is sick with fever," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I would walk into the mouth of a saber-tooth for the healing leaves you speak of. I will go." Another followed, then another. It was a tide of hope, washing away the foundations of fear. Rorik looked at Kale, truly seeing him for the first time. He saw not a dreamer, but a leader. A man who had faced the ultimate unknown and had returned not just with food for the body, but with a vision for the soul. With a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of generations, Rorik gave a single, sharp nod. "At dawn," he said, his voice hoarse. "We will go. You will lead, Kale. And may the spirits forgive us all if you are wrong." The next morning, as the first rays of the Sunfather touched the stone brow, a small party of the clan's strongest and bravest gathered. Kale stood at their head, not in front of them, but beside Rorik. A silent understanding passed between the dreamer and the hunter. As they turned their faces north and took their first steps into the great forest, Kale heard it again, faint on the wind, the distant, powerful hum. But now he was not the only one who could hear it. It was the sound of their future, the song of a new home, the joined voices of fury and wisdom, calling their people out of the gray lands and into a world of color, balance, and breathtaking life.